Hi, good evening, everyone. A very warm welcome to a very exciting session we are about to begin. It's talking to six gorgeous, accomplished young royals on their journey with craft, with heritage, with wellness, with beauty, with organic farming. I'm Anshu Khanna. I'm the founder of Royal Fables. I'm the person who's working day and night to showcase what I feel is the richest legacy, richest part of Indian legacy, Royal India. And I'm so glad to welcome Nonita Kalra. I don't think she needs any introduction, but just to say it in a few words, Nonita is a lady who writes beautifully. I think she's, in the true sense, a craft evangelist, a fashion voice, a very strong voice in fashion. She's been editor of Harper's. She was the editor of Elle. But beyond all that, I think Nonita's word is something people respect for what it is worth, for how she speaks sense, on how she has an eye for information, and how she can actually discover and write about talent. And I think heritage is very important for her, and that's reflected very well in the way she turned around Harper's Bazaar, where there was always space for Indian, handmade India, and she did good justice to it. So I'd like to welcome her. I'd like to also welcome the six gorgeous women. Welcome, Nonita, to this beautiful discussion with six gorgeous women, and you being the one who is going to get them to talk about their what's close to their heart. So it's over to you.
Thank you, Anshu. You are very, very generous. I think what this conversation, one of the reasons I'm super excited about it is this conversation is all about women supporting each other. When you told me that it's going to be six extraordinary young women, I thought, what could be better? Because one of the things that I've seen emerge out of this interesting time, I don't want to put a negative spin on it, is that I've seen that a lot of people have had time to support each other, time to reach out and encourage each other. What I'm excited about also is that each one of these women is an entrepreneur. They come from legacy. They are modernizing it. They're entrepreneurs. They're smart. They're young. They have each other's back, which is why I think we'll find a lot of common stories. They have common histories, but they've also been able to share their common stories to get ahead. So thank you for having me. I'm very excited to be part of this. We're going to break our conversation into three sections just so that you get the most out of it. And I think that our first conversation is with Urvashi Singh and Akshita Bhansdeo. Anshu. Hi,
So
Urvashi.
hi,
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 hi, how are
Urvashi.
you, Nanika? Hi.
So there we have Akshita. So just to introduce the two of them. Now, I don't even know how to introduce the two of them because they wear so many hats. But I think the one consistent hat they wear is that of being a heritage hoteliers and recreating what they inherited as a legacy and a property, and making it user friendly and yet keeping the craft very, like, the entire experience very rooted. So over to the three of you in your conversation on heritage hospitality and keeping a property alive with its rootedness.
Thank you, Mrs. Garma.
Thank
I
you.
think it's really, when I sent you the questions, I said interesting times call for interesting measures. And I think we're living in very, very interesting times. I think Charles Dickens would be proud of this period. But, instead of getting straight into how difficult it has been and why are we doing and what are we going to do next, what I thought that was really interesting, Orvishi, about what you do is you left the family palace to set up something of your own because you had your own vision for it. What was that vision and where is it at today? I know you're sitting in Bombay and you're one of the brave that traveled, and I'm so impressed with you. But tell me a little bit about Urvishi's retreat, and may I congratulate you on naming it after yourself. Not enough women own things.
Okay, thank you. Okay, that's a lot of questions, Nonita, but I will try to do justice to them without dragging myself on too long. So I think it would be an overcredit on my part if I just said that, well, I moved away and I set it up and here is a property that's named after me. I take immense pride in it. But it's this is one of the examples of how things play out in a different manner. It's mostly coincidence, and then later it all kind of seems to make sense. For Urvishi's retreat, my parents and my brother and I have been frequenting the Himalayas ever since we can remember. My father and my mother both are die-hard fans, especially of Himachal Pradesh, of the Kullu Valley. And what actually happened was that my father identified a very pretty place in the northern side of Manali, in a place called Shanag, to build me a summer cottage. Now, we kind of procured the land and we let it sit. And in about 5 years time, yeah, our neighbor wanted to sell off the place, so he wasn't really getting a buyer, and he suggested to my father that we come from a family of hoteliers, so why don't we consider taking up his space as well, and crafting it into a hotel of sorts, of a resort. So, with my father and brother being actively engaged in politics, and with the heritage hotel projects back in Rajasthan, my father turned to me, and I was at LSE at the time, and I was doing my masters. And he said that, why don't you come back, and whenever you're done with your masters, why don't you take this up? So I was a little intimidated at the start, and I said that, well, I don't have a formal degree in hospitality. I'm a social science student. I've studied gender. I write. I don't know how I'll do it. So he says, you've grown up in a family of hoteliers, and you've grown up in a hotel. So you've practically seen it happen, and it's hands on, and we will back you up with our experience and expertise. And I think you should take up the challenge. And it's also a way of kind of paying homage to Himachal Pradesh and the place that's so close to your heart. So I came back, and when I saw the place, I said, "I've got to be a fool to let this go, or to not immerse into a life that comprises of the hills, and just extending hospitality to people." So I did take it on, and in search of a better name, it got named Urvishi's Retreat, because the registration required us to act fast. So we said, okay, for the time being, it's fine, and then it just stuck on. So I should get a very fractional piece of that credit that you're so generous to give.
But don't you feel that since it's your own, that you treated it differently? When you put your name on something, and as a writer, you would know when you take a byline, it means different things to you. And
Yes.
you have said that you have treated it. I know it's run professionally, but you have treated it differently. It's all about giving back to the earth, of being one with nature, of sustainability. And these are words that we use and we love, because I think the planet is showing us what's happened when we haven't listened.
Yes,
So,
absolutely.
what do you do to make it particularly sustainable?
So, Nonita, when I started off, I think I was very fortunate to be able to get into the hospitality line in the year 2015, because I think the past decade has blurred the boundaries between the luxury and non-luxury segment. And what that has, the way that it's benefited me in particular, and maybe many like me who are looking after boutique homestays, is that it's allowed us to conceptualize alternative hospitality, and fill in for all the places that you feel have lacked in your past hospitality experience. So, for example, I think one of the main examples would be that we are required as boutique hoteliers to very deftly traverse very subtle line between intent and protocol. One is, there is a protocol that you have to follow because that's the way that it's done in the hotels, and on the other hand, there could be your intent which has not entered standard protocol yet, but which might make a little more sense than that protocol, because protocols they're usually universalized, whereas intent is localized. That's what I feel. So I had that a free hand to actually conceptualize it in a way that I would extend hospitality. So right from the logo to the color schemes, to the way that the day is conducted there for the guests. Small things. There's a quote that will be. I'll write a new quote on the blackboard every day for guests to look at when they enter the dining venue for breakfast. We'll bake homemade cakes for dinner. So sustainability, I think, lies in giving back to the place, being very, very ecologically conscious. Also, I think recruiting people from that area, and I don't think hospitality needs that much formal training as people believe for it to require. I think hospitality is a language that you either understand or you don't understand. I don't think it needs people to kind of exactly understand each other's words. It's through gestures also. So that's just how we organically built our team. And very simply speaking, it was just a formalized effort around delivering hospitality and your heartfelt warmth to people. That's about it.
And that's where intent makes is the differentiator, right?
Yes, yes.
Coming to Akshita, you have talked about sustainability from day one as well, and you're renovating one of the most exquisite properties I've seen. At Bazaar, we used to stalk the Bulgaria Palace because it looked like a scene out of a Wes Anderson film. But you had to be really, really sensitive to local requirements, particularly where you're placed. Tell me what you have kept in mind, and then we will talk a little more about you.
Hello, thank you for that. That was so kind of you to say, and very much appreciated. And I think, to begin with, just to describe to the audience, the Bulgaria Palace is an 18th century boutique property in Mayurbhanj, which is the largest district of Orissa, and it's 4 hours away from the nearest airports are Calcutta and Bhubaneswar. Now, this is important because you're building a property in an offbeat location. A lot of what Urvashi very eloquently described is, understanding the property and the destination in terms of how you're giving back, being sensitive to ecological needs. And for us, an additional interesting milieu was the fact that, there have been, we opened up last year when, and since we've had 2 cyclones and a global pandemic. And so I think boutique properties have to very lightly sort of, like she said, traverse between what is expected from a hotel, but at the same time provide the experience of a home, away from home. And so I think for us, sustainability was important because me and my sister both were studying abroad. And this was the last sort of heirloom we had and sort of legacy we had in the family. It's got a beautiful love story behind it. And the reason why it looks kind of Wes Anderson-y. But we really thought that this was about not just opening it up as selling rooms, but we were selling experiences, shared experiences. And so when we came back, for us, it was about preserving a living museum almost. And that's why no one room looks similar to each other. There was a symmetry in the house, and there was a sort of history to the house we wanted to preserve. So right from the conception of opening up the doors of the Bulgaria Palace, we wanted to make sure that we could reduce our carbon footprint. We could get sustainability consultants on board. We could work with an interior decorator and a designer who could really understand the blueprint of the house as it existed, what it existed for, and whether that was getting more ecologically sensitive building materials or trying to restore it in a way where we had very little waste, all the way up to hiring locally, because we aren't hiring hospitality trained staff. We're hiring locally to provide supplemental incomes. And the idea of Bulgaria really was about how do you bring development back into a district that's kind of lost in time, especially when it was a district that had a lot of innovation and entrepreneurship. And so we really looked back at the books of what the erstwhile princely state had done well, and sort of tried to use travel as a catalyst for development. So 10% of the funds raised by guests go back into local community initiatives, whether that's self-help groups or nonprofits, or even community organizations supported by women that we would like to be able to promote. And so I think that when you're trying to, for a lot of people, it was about how do you build a sustainable hotel. But for us, it was about how do you bring back sustainable development and increase incomes into a district that sort of has had in 75 years sort of not had the best development indicators, but it's very natural, resource rich. And so for me, a little bit of also promoting that sustainability from idea to execution was I wanted to be able to change the narrative of what it meant to come from a state like Orissa and redefine luxury and redefine wellness and conscious travel within India. And so I did have a little bit of change the narrative of hoteliers, of boutique properties, and people really being able to look within India for conscious luxury. So sustainability encompasses all of that.
Here you are, you've done all the storytelling, you've had all of this, and I love what both Urvashi and you say, because it strikes me as just what India is about, the intent, the people. I think we're the most ridiculously hospitable people you'll ever meet, and if you don't tamper it with process, you actually get a level of luxury that you will never get anywhere else.
That's true.
And I also love that you're doing it locally, because we're also so incredibly sustainable. I mean, it's horrific, but even to this date, we're sustainable and we recycle, reuse, and rewear. Before we got on, I was telling you all that, I have disasters with curtains, as I was telling you, but my first disaster with a curtain was my mother taking her old curtains and making my birthday party dress with it. Because we did that, right? I mean, we've all worn our mother's curtains and but it is true, right? And it's what you're doing when you work with the people, you work with the earth, you recycle and you reuse. Akshita, you left with the idea of storytelling, and I find that really, really interesting. And I will ask both of you this. Urvashi, you're a writer. You do the Rajputana Collective. I think Akshita was in the 6th edition.
Yes, that's correct.
May issue. Akshita, you are a marketing and strategy consultant, and we've met when you've worn various hats.
Yeah.
Consulting on a sort of artificial intelligence. How are you going to use storytelling to get people to either come to your property or to experience it and add value to it, even when they're not spending money in it?
It's a really good question. I'm going to separate that a little bit and first delve with the idea of storytelling and why I think that's so important. Because my sister and me, Mrinalika, we kind of divide the responsibilities. And while she's looking over operations administration, for me, experiences and partnerships was extremely important. Again, I looked at Bulgaria Palace as a startup, bootstrap organization. This is the amount of fund we have, where this is how much we've taken from the family, being blessed and very, very privileged to be able to have a head start. And this is how much we're going to raise from the market. And a lot of people are like, why doesn't the government support? And, what about agencies? And, the government's made up of people. We form the government. So whatever, consumer trends will define where industry will spend its money. And it's high time that for heritage properties, we start looking within India to raise that kind of attention and funds. And that's where storytelling plays a part. Because I don't know if my aim is to convince people to come to Bulgaria. My aim is to convince people to invest in Orissa. So when I was like 18 years, I'm going to say one anecdote. When I was 18 years old, I had my first job in New York, and I was in charge as an intern, in charge of a guest list for a fundraising gala, which was being hosted by the former Foreign Secretary, David Miliband. And the first person I wanted to invite was Bibhu Mohapatra. And I DM'd his Instagram and I emailed him because I said, I need an Oriya fashion designer who's made it in the global world to come and sit front row at a New York fundraising event, because Oriyas need to show up, whether it's for refugees in Syria and New York or whether it's for homegrown artifacts. And I emailed a few designers, but Bibu was so kind to attend and dress me for that event. But that was important because that was initial steps of me storytelling. Because how many times have we, and this is not just for Orissa. There's a few states in India which I think we can do better for. But states which have been through conflict, states that have been through and have a majority of indigenous tribal people, I think that's a little bit of where the custodianship comes in, because you have privilege to speak for a number of people who don't have these kind of platforms. And so when you're reading about Bulgaria, I want you to read about Dokra artifacts. I want you to read about Sabai. I want you to read about endangered folk arts. And so that's where storytelling comes in, if I answer that question a little better. So even if you don't come and spend money in Bulgaria, when you come to Mayurbhanj, you're my host, you're my guest. And I'm going to invite Mayurbhanj Chow dancers to perform for you because you don't know you even want that to see that yet. And then I'm going to explain to you why it's important that we preserve this livelihood. So, it's not when people come here, I never expect people to go like, oh, you've seen a village or you've seen this art and craft. You should buy a few just to help them out. You're going to buy it because the design and innovation and the quality of the product is so high level that I know Bloomingdale's going to want the next batch. So I think it's a little bit about using innovation, design, and technology to contemporize a little bit of the old ideas and resell it. And that's where marketing and branding and strategy really plays a role. Because, for example, I think Rajasthan just does it really well. And I have to say that because my mother's from Jaisalmer, so I've heard about Rajasthan. It's laurels in the hospitality industry, but it's because they do their storytelling extremely well, and that's what people remember. And for the second part, in terms of, I think the good thing my family did was they never let us think the privilege was extending to any more than their generation. So I'm as excited as, if when I was younger and I found out that my family had this history, I was excited as anyone else. So the Princess's Diaries is more befitting a story that I understood than any Disney story. Because you're like, oh, I have that. And we have these books and we have this. And it was never, so there was always you gave like 100 square foot and I'd be so excited because the privilege didn't extend to my generation. We had to earn it. You earn your credit. And so
Urvashi says that in every interview. I actually pulled out so many of her quotes because I loved what she said. She was like, we have to earn it. You may think we have it easy, and it's difficult when people treat you as a princess. She rejects it quite enthusiastically.
Yeah. Because I think that, because it's our ancestors did the leadership. You have to look at your history with a bit of gray. There's no black and white. You can't look at their actions in a vacuum in time. But for us, we have choice. You can just stay in New York. You can stay in London. You can stay. But I think the choice to come back and then try to make a difference and use your knowledge and expertise, I think that's huge. And to be able to provide income and go back and find out what you like. So I'm extremely passionate about all this. I choose to live in Mayurbhanj and commute from my job in Bombay or wherever else I need to be. And what I loved about my ancestors was they brought the world to them. The only thing they didn't have was technology, and I have that. So working in artificial intelligence that's a passion of mine. I want to know more about data science. I think that's where the world is going, and I'd want to go there too, because it's something my ancestors did as well. One of my ancestors invested in a little-known startup by a very famous Parsi gentleman called J.N. Tata. The first iron ore and steel mine took place in 1904 in Mayurbhanj. I found that out while I was interning. I was working at Tata Trust as an intern on the side of the room, and I realized I should dream bigger in life. Taking the local train. But so the interesting thing with technology is I think the hospitality industry or any of the industries, whether it's, museums, crafts, it's media, publishing, technology is going to be a big factor. And we need to know how to leverage technology to make sure heritage is still encompassed in the vision of our communities and our future. And I think that, because of the pandemic, just to be mindful of what's happening around us, 10% of museums and galleries are not going to reopen. And so now more than ever, we need to understand how we can use technology and catalyze its benefits, especially because we come from a country which is digitally illiterate. So not a lot of people know how to use iPhones and even Androids.
Illiterate, but we have a lot of access to data, which is going to change.
Yeah.
Why India is seen as a game changer. Urvashi, could I ask you to answer the same question? Akshita, you also answered my third question, by the way. So I'm going to not even come back to you. I'm just telling you.
Okay.
I think I agree with Akshita on many of the topics that she's covered very articulately, and I think really well, because I think I've interacted with Akshita mainly through the written format. So to hear her in person in a way that COVID situations allow best. It's almost like having you both in front of me. So, like she said, I was going to mention that we both have one thing in common, actually two. Both our mothers, Akshita's mother and my father are both from Rajasthan, right? Akshita's mother comes from Jaisalmer, and my father's side is from Himsar. They're not very far apart. They're both desert states. And the other half of your life pulls you towards places that are probably at a polar opposite to, let's say, the recognition and the fame that Rajasthan has got. I suppose one of the reasons why that is because uh, Rajasthan and Kerala were amongst the first two states to really open up to global tourism, while the other states are kind of reaching their 90s growth now, which doesn't have to be such a bad thing, because Rajasthan and Kerala back then did not have technology the way that, let's say, Orissa does now and Himachal does now. I think there is no dearth of cultural capital in any place. I think it's just the way it's marketed. So, which is why I think it's really important that the question of marketing and branding came up. So, yeah, I won't repeat that. When it comes to stories, I think because I'm a writer and I'm accustomed to telling so many stories, even Rajputana Collective, by the way, just came by coincidence on a rainy morning when there was this historically innate, poorly researched rant about how post-colonial India is very feudal when it comes to their Rajput community, and they are so obsessed with kind of just drooling all over its glamour and all of that. And why should that happen when we were British loyalists and Tipu Sultan's descendants are pulling rickshaws? So I mean, I wasn't so offended, but I was just curious to tell the gentleman that, you've really got maybe just a part of the picture, which I don't blame him for, because there's this African proverb that I mentioned in that article as well, which says that as long as the lion learns to ride, it'll be the hunter's story. So in really, I think what all of us on this panel today have in common, like Akshita mentioned, is that we come with tremendous privilege. We come with a choice to kind of go between the stories that we want to tell. We could selectively eliminate something. We could selectively highlight something. And just a brief anecdote, when I was I was traveling around Spiti, and I stayed in this beautiful homestay in Kaza called Dazor, which is run by Mr. Karan Beer. So what the entrance wall said was, the world isn't made up of as many atoms as it is made up of stories. I think that really stuck with me, because I said, wow, that's true, because each person is, I think each one of us looks for a little of our own selves in the people we meet, in the stories we tell, in the stories we hear. So, well, and I think the gift of communication that we are willing to harness, I think that's what also ties us all together, which ties you, Nonita, and Akshita, and me also together, although we've never met before this in a triglomerate. So we're all telling stories, and we have the privilege of words. So when it comes to hospitality, as the host, you have the power. See, to even tell a story or to articulate a story is again a role of tremendous power, and you have to dispense it responsibly. So as a host, you are designing the way that a story should play, or you are leading it. At least you might not always be the dominant, you might not always be the protagonist, or the, I hope we're never the anti-heroes in that story. That would be really like but just to steer that, to be the designer of a story without attaching yourself too much to the outcome, to letting it play out for the people who are coming to experience that story. So like she said, sometimes when people come to your place, like let's say if they come to Mayurbhanj, or they come to Keemsar, or they come to Manali, they don't necessarily know what they're going to experience, but all you need is an open mind, like willingness to experience what you're going to throw at them, and they take it from there. So actually, I think as hoteliers, we get way more credit than we should, because it's the guests who are the superstars. It's them who, each and every guest is willing to plunge into that very myriad pool, of experiences, of maybe even disappointments, maybe adventures, surprises. So I think there's so much storytelling in hospitality.
My last question to you is going to be, you're tasked with bringing heritage into the 21st century. But I don't really think I need to ask it, because what I'm hearing is really of course, intent over SOP, over purpose. But what I'm hearing that's really beautiful is that you're actually leaving lines between sentences, gaps between words for people to enter your world and take away their story from it. And I think that that is actually a really valuable lesson for young entrepreneurs to hear. Urvashi and Akshita, I feel that we could talk forever, but we have such an exciting panel, and I want to do justice to your friends as well. Stay with us as we go on to the next conversation. Anshu, again, will very graciously introduce it.
Thank you, girls. This was really exciting, and I always love listening to both of them. And Nonita, you put so much of, as I said, you added so much gravitas to it. So the next two panelists we have are doing. We're going to talk about something which is actually really a soft spot for both of us, Nonita. It's craft, it's design, it's working with craftsmen. So we have Yashaswini, who is working with the museum in Odisha, and she could have lived anywhere, but she decided to go back to her home state and is actually helping revive a lot of crafts. So she'll tell you what she's doing at the museum. And we have Manvi Kumari, who's actually my backbone. She's the one who's helping me with Royal Fables. And again, Manvi was someone who had a great job going in the US, came back and started working with GQ, and then her inner calling was to work with something which will revive her culture. And honestly, that's what she's doing with Royal Fables, and we are trying to showcase the India face of royalty, and not just the Cartiers and the Van Cleefs that they bought, but the craft they developed, and the legacy goes on. So over to all three of you.
Thank you, Anshu. You make my job very, very easy. The question that I actually wanted to ask both of you, and we touched upon it in our first conversation, that you could live anywhere in the world. You have these wonderful jobs. You study the most interesting, thoughtful things, sort of a history, to study history and philosophy, to do your master's in these subjects. Manvi, you've worked in the most fabulous places. What brings you back? What brings you back? What is that story? And what has been the pull? Because I think that that's one of the most important things to look at before we look at the work that you do with craft.
Hi, Nanita. Thank you so much for firstly hosting this session, and Ms. Khanna for the lovely introduction. Like Akshita mentioned, I think it's a choice. When I moved to the States, I always knew I wanted to come back home. Mainly because I didn't firstly want to live away from so many of my loved ones for so long. And being an only child, I did want to return home. I also felt like I wanted to do something that's closer to my background. And, if you ask a fashion student out of college who they want to work for, I think the most common answers are usually an international designer, a fashion magazine, global brand, fashion week. So I feel like when I ticked off all of those from my list, I knew I wanted to do something that was closer to my background. And so personally and professionally, I think it was both a win-win situation. And I knew that moving back home will help me achieve what I really wanted to.
But did working with brands like Isimeyaki sort of help you maybe understand what it is you wanted to do when you came back? What were the takeaways? Because, so many people go and study abroad and work abroad, but they leave that life there and they come here to another life pretending that the two had never met. And yet, what I noticed in both your resumes and passions, because I think you've transcended it from work to its passion. What was that? What did you learn? How did you meld the two?
I think, culture awareness. I felt like with, my work at Brooks Brother, or whether it was Isemeyaki, I saw that people came from different backgrounds. And as I met more and more people, I understood that everyone has a culture and they are different. And to adapt their thought processes, you have to firstly accept that. And, moving back, of course, that was one of the skills that I can still use in a country that's so culturally diverse. What I really mean by that is that, when at Isemeyaki, most of our employees and co-workers were from Japan. There were times where we couldn't understand the language and it was translated to us later. And, of course, it helped me understand and adapt to everything as I met people. And I think that is a skill that is going to help me even going forward.
What about you, Yashaswini?
I think for me, it was always coming home. I went out to study and I knew I wanted to come back because even as a child, I would always crib about people not knowing Orissa or where I come from. And I've grown up here. I've grown up with history all around me. So it was done thing. So I went, I studied, and I owe a lot of it to my teachers because they were brilliant with how they taught me the subjects, whether it was my history teachers at Mayo or my philosophy professors at LSR. They were absolutely brilliant. And I fell in love with the subject before anything else. So I knew this is what I wanted to study. And I knew I wanted to come home. So in 2018, when I came back, I visited the museum and I knew I wanted to work there. And that was it. And there was no questions, there was no thinking about it. And my parents have always been so supportive. They were just like, okay, do your thing. And they were very happy to have me home. So there was no questions. It was a done thing. It was very
Museum,
easy coming home.
did the museum compare to what you've seen internationally? Because one of the experiences I have is that when I go to a museum in India, I am invariably disappointed. You know, the storytelling is terrible. When you walk through, it's unimpressive. Whereas one of the reasons you go to London is to actually just get lost in the museums. You can spend days there. So, what was your experience when you walked in? I know you're very closely associated with it. So, what was your first impression, and what have you done with it since? Well, it's only been what, a year and a half, close to two now, right?
Yes. Yes.
A year and
So
months.
when I was a child, my mother would take me to the Crafts Museum in Delhi because she's heavily into the crafts, and even here, that's what we do. And then when I saw this museum, it was like going back to my childhood because it's been set up by the same person. So Professor Jitendra Jain, he's very, very well known in the field. And
I'm a
when
huge
you
fan.
walk into this, yes, so was I. So when I met him, I was so starstruck, and he said, "You need to calm down and do your job now. Keep it running, keep it going." So that was great. That was something he told me. But this whole place, it's set up over 13 acres, and it uses the local materials. It has these really really adorable roof tiles, and I went in the museum and we did this guided tour that they did. And these are people who've grown up here. And when they talked about the crafts, it was like coming home. So I would wake up every Monday morning saying, okay, I want to go to work. My parents' biggest complaint was that I used to work 6.5 days a week. But I loved it. And I mean, I would recommend everyone. You have to visit the museum. It's absolutely wonderful. It's like a little haven in the chaos of the city. Yeah, it's absolutely wonderful, and it does. I wasn't so sure I would enjoy working at a museum in India because you see other museums and you're just like, okay, I need to clean the grills here, or there's too much dust on the artifacts. But this place was just so wonderful. It was impeccable. The amount of effort that's gone into it. It's a show house for the craft and culture of the state. So yeah, it was just wonderful.
And yet, why don't more people know about it? What are you planning? I'm sure you have big plans. And I think this is a great space for you to share with people because what has happened is since March, we've all felt like we've been at a standstill. But what has also been happening is that people have used the time to recalibrate, to think, to say, this is what I'm going to do differently. This didn't work. So, what are you planning? Maybe just a sneak peek because craft has taken a hit, just like the rest of the economy has taken a hit.
So one of the biggest problems we realized was that you have these craftspersons who are doing wonderful work, but they don't have the platform to exhibit and they don't have the platform to sell their wares. So recently, the government of Orissa just signed an MOU with Flipkart. So now you'll have all the products available straight from the artisan's home through the museum and then on Flipkart. So that's something we've done. The other thing is we're trying to make it more digital. We've digitized our entire collection. But we're a very young museum. We're only 2.5 years old. So we're still growing, we're still learning. We have a very, very young team. So yeah, I think we're trying to make it more digital. We have our social media, which is pretty active. I used to write content for that, and then I trained my team to do it. So now I don't have to do it, so I can concentrate more on writing for myself, because that's something I miss. When you get so busy, you tend to lose sight of what you really want to do. But yeah, so pretty much that.
Um, it's interesting that Manvi's also been working since 2017, and I think your journeys are very similar. And as once you came back and you set up or worked with something really new, Manvi, your work with the Palace Arcanas and the Kitchen of the Kings, that sounds really interesting. I know that it's something that existed, but what have you done with it? What was your perception of it? Because I think that, and we keep coming back to storytelling, but food tells you everything about a place. What grows there, what the politics were, what the economics were, what society thought, right? And in food, we always put luxury. I mean, our best spices, our best taste. So tell me a little bit about your journey with these two fabulous projects.
Okay, so I met Mrs. Khanna in 2017. Of course, Royal Fables was something I had heard about even before that, because so many of my own relatives are part of the forum. And when I met Mrs. Khanna, it felt like a perfect fit after hearing her vision with what she wanted to do with her brand going forward. So I joined as the head of marketing and merchandising, and that year we did launch two sub brands to the exposition, namely Palace Karkhanas and Kitchen of the Kings. The main idea being here was that while we were promoting both palace crafts and royal cuisines, it was somewhere getting diluted in an exhibition format. So it became important to give them both their specific branding and give it their own space within our forum. So with Palace Karkhanas, we launched at the Chanakya. This was a venture into the real world and gave it its luxury home that it truly deserved. With Kitchen of the King, we plan on creating a platform for our audiences who could come and experience regal cuisines like Nabi from Rampur, Dham from the hills, even Punjabi from Patiala. Because unfortunately, we found that a lot of people would only consider, wouldn't look beyond Lal Mas from Rajasthan, or wouldn't look beyond, popular things like dal bati from Malwa. So this was our idea of bringing different regions and authentic cuisines to people and break away from that thought process. So these were the two, sub brands that we have been taking forward since that year.
We've been talking about sort of using this time to think about what you've been doing, rejig it. Have you thought about a lot of change? What are you going to keep the same and what are you going to change? Because we're all going to change a lot of things. Why do I feel that we've all thought about it so much and thought about what we're going to do? So what are you going to change and what are you going to keep the same?
Ever since we've all been in isolation, I think the most common term that we've all been hearing is social distancing. And I think what we've been practicing is more of physical distancing. Socially, we haven't been stronger. So, of course, while our website does exist and we update it with all our event information and our blog with a lot of articles, I think it's time for us to, have all of these crafts available even globally, which is something we've always wanted to do, but have had a really jam-packed calendar. So, I think having a digital platform where people can shop from all of these different regions of India and having it present to, we plan on firstly launching with the, being available in the United States and then moving on to UK and other parts of Asia.
So what sort of conversation do you think you will have when you talk about this around the world? I mean, the conversation, your website is geared towards one common person, or are you going to sort of break it for an Indian customer, a global consumer? I ask because we've realized the storytelling is really, really important. And, Yashaswini, I couldn't stop laughing when you said you used to write your own content, because one would think that, the Princess Diaries or the Princess doesn't need to do this. But I know you're a passionate writer. You're a published poet, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
So tell me, when you were doing the storytelling and you revamped your website, and I'll ask you this as well, Manvi, what did you keep in mind when you were briefing and teaching your teams?
I think the main
the one
focus
thing.
here is that, sorry.
No, it's
Let's
fine. You
give
should
you
go
a
ahead.
Still has Wi-Fi. Her Wi-Fi is going to drop very soon. I can tell.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah. No. So I think while talking to my team, yes, but I think the easiest way to tell a story right is to make it personal. The minute you make it personal for someone, they connect to it better. You have to put it in context. That's also why I studied what I studied, because you can't not understand your history and then talk about your future. Our memories make us, and we learn from them. So it was very simple. You tell a story. So if you're talking about a craft, you talk about the craft person, you talk about how they've produced something or they've created something. And the minute you make it personal, people are more interested. Like the number of people who read social media articles on the humans of Bombay, why do all of us follow it? Because these are stories. We want to hear these stories. We want to connect with them. And when you do, your appreciation for whatever it is that they're doing increases manifold. So I think what we tried doing was making these things
But
personal. We tried
how do you
right
keep
now
the
we're
fine
looking for.
balance? How do you keep this
I
fine
think
balance between
it's
keeping
understanding. Yeah, so I
your
think it's
Wi-Fi?
also understanding that it's back. Yes, so it's understanding that you have to tell a story, but you have to tell it in a way that somebody realizes the worth of the story. It's not just coming and saying something. It's coming and actually telling a story to make a difference. It's very simple. It's how in school we had these moral science classes. They would tell us stories to teach us lessons. Until date, we all remember them and we've all learned them. And if you have younger cousins, you've told your cousins those stories. So why not do the same thing with our culture and our craft? So yeah, it was just finding that one point where you stop, because you can keep talking. So you have to find that place where you stop, where you draw the line and say, okay, I've told you this much. Now the rest is up to you to understand, and it's how you would like to read the story.
But I also love the fact that you're not approaching the craftsperson like a lot of people do, where he's like the guy who needs sympathy and uplifting. In the West, your craftsperson or your artist is as I've seen this. I was at an Hermes
Yeah.
event, and the CEO and the head saddler stand next to each other and greet guests. They earn the same amount of money as well. So it's really interesting that you talk about storytelling in a way where you again leave the gap for the person to get to know what you're talking about. We're running quite late, Manvi, but I have to ask you this before we go. Conservation has also been in your DNA. I was reading a really lovely piece on you where you were bringing craft into your everyday. Whether it's your fashion choices or it's wearing an heirloom in a modern way. And I think both your clothes choices today tell me a lot. But tell me, how do you marry the two? Because at one point, you have a leg deeply in the past because you're the keepers of heritage. At the other level, you're young women, you know. You're young women, like everybody. We don't want to comb our hair every day. We are probably wearing sweatpants under all these formal clothes. How do you find the balance between the two?
I absolutely agree with you. There are those days, and I think the balancing act comes quite naturally. I think all of us from a young age have been told and explained to that every place and occasion has a dress code, and that's what makes your clothing acceptable in certain places. So I think that's something that is in the back of my head when I am getting ready or dressed for an occasion. Traditionally, I love that we still wear our saris and poshaks to weddings. It's something I look forward to. It's something I'm waiting to pull out of my closet. And of course, and like family gatherings and things like that, we do follow protocol, whether it comes to greeting or talking to certain people and relatives. But day-to-day life, I feel like in the city, I'm still like any other regular working girl. So it's just something that falls into place.
Yashaswini, you agree that we're completely comfortable with contradiction? Is that a way
Yes,
of life?
I call myself a closet of contradiction. Yes, it is, and I
Oh,
think it's wonderful because you can just switch between these different personas that you have. And I've made the sari a part of my life, whether it's work, whether it's a party. I mean, if you talk to my college friends, they'll tell you she stand up for all these party communities because that's what I'm more comfortable in. And I think style is where you are comfortable. So where the moment you're comfortable, you're confident, and that's where your style lies. So I think it's just understanding where you want to wear what. Yes, of course, as Manija said, that we were always told that every place has its particular dress code. And it's easy to play around with it a little bit now because people aren't that strict. I can wear my silver jewelry and land at a function, and people will still be as happy because I'm in a sari. Not realizing that given the choice, I've been saris all day long and in different varieties often. It's pretty easy. I mean, closet of contradictions is what we are, and we're, I think, doing a good job at it. So yeah, why not?
so I guess the lesson from this conversation is that find your conversation, be comfortable with your contradictions. Thank you so much. It's been a real help chatting with you and understanding what makes you stay very, very modern. Thank you very much. Anshu, I think our final session is on wellness. I'm sorry we're running late, but the conversations are so fabulous that I'm not going to let these young women go.
Thank you. I'm also very excited listening to all of them, and every day you learn something. So thanks, Manvi. Thanks, Yashaswini. Now I'd like to welcome Divya Jubal and Mriganka Kumari. Now Divya is coming in all the way from Simla. She's I don't even know how to introduce her, because suddenly she's in this new avatar of trying to promote wellness and spiritual healing and metaphysics, and I'm sure she'll do it really, really well, because every time I've had a conversation with her, it's been very, very intense. And Bianca, her her honeys, especially the jamun one, I've been trying to make sure it doesn't get over. It's so wonderful, and she's actually into organic farming in a little state called Pratapgarh, which is a little ahead of Lucknow. And she's a city slicker and a farmer at the same time. And Divya lives in Simla, so over to all of you.
Thank you, Anshuji, for the wonderful introduction. So kind.
Thank
It was
you.
really a lovely introduction. I'm very excited to speak to you both because wellness is an absolute huge passion of mine. But I think the first step towards physical wellness comes from actually emotional wellness. And from things I've read that both of you have said, I think it comes from the fact that you're very, very comfortable with being connected to tradition and equally comfortable with being very modern. And we touched upon this earlier as well in our past conversation. How do you find this balance? What helps you find this balance? And I ask this as my opening question and not my closing question, because I think one of the things this pandemic has taught us is a lot of us are not okay and we're okay. But mostly it's okay to be okay and not okay. So where do you find your balance? Does being traditional help? I mean, Divya, maybe we can go with you first.
Sure. So that's an interesting question you ask, because when I was growing up, in the sense, my father has had an extremely strong matriarchal influence in our family, because my grandmother inherently was a princess of Kapurthala, and all these three sisters had grown up abroad all their lives. In the sense, I mean, they had French governesses, and by the time they were 9 and 10, they had been packed off and sent off to Europe. And it was a culture where back in India, at that point, everybody was still somewhat, the Rajput ladies were in parda. But what was interestingly a very unique paradox, when these young girls with their lovely European dresses would come back and fit into the Darbar hall, they would always be like, oh, mummy, I'm feeling terrible. And, this is what they said to me. And, I feel awful about the fact that why can't I be a part of what the boys are doing? And, and the mother and my great grandmother would be like, you can't say all these things. You can't express all these things because you have to keep all these things within you, which is how most Indian women were taught to be a certain prototype, which is you look, see, observe, and then you retain it all within yourself. And over the years, what happens is that I saw that how these three different sisters, how their lives panned out. Because each unique character had her own personality, her own demeanor, her own way of expressing and assimilating life's experiences. So the ones who stayed closer to India eventually got married and, had children, etc., sort of were able to find a more cohesive system of sustainability and living as a family unit. But my aunt, who I think was an iconic woman of her time in the 1930s, she was the first female voice of the BBC in London. It was a big thing, like in the sense she was Indian and she was the first female voice of the BBC in London. And then she went on to be cast by George Orwell in this film, for which she got absolute cold feet because George Orwell wrote Animal Farm. He was a well-known novelist. And then there was 1984. But she decided to leave all that and go cover World War II and heal and work with people who had completely been destroyed and massacred by the sheer, the whole fury and the whole massacre of the war. So that's what she dedicated her life to. So what I noticed was that when she became an individual entity and it wasn't about her family, she threw herself and she threw her life into serving people. But what happened eventually was that in the process of serving and serving and serving and not having a family unit, eventually she retired in Ibiza. But none of us really knew what happened after a while. And then she had mysteriously passed away. And then we heard that she had been really unwell, but she hadn't communicated anything because she had taken on so much upon herself. And everybody realized later that maybe they should have been more communicative and more expressive. And maybe it was just that there wasn't any technology back then. Letters took weeks and weeks to get back and forth. So this was something which my grandmother, when she shared with me, I said, how terrible. I said, she did so much for people. She didn't, she was a gorgeous woman. She could have married any Maharaja and lived off the fat of the land. And, but she decided to take on a very solitary but yet a very giving existence. And what is the reward for actually doing that? That eventually you don't have anyone to really talk to. So that was something which struck a note and a chord with me in my early years when I was like almost like 11, 12, because I was fascinated by her. And I was like, I have to do something about this at some point in my life, but I don't know when and how. And then through our growing up, I noticed not just in royal families, but I noticed that there is a very strong sense of, people who are garrulous and who like to sort of, speak their mind are sort of looked at upon very suspiciously, And the more you have these structured, polite conversations, that's sort of, the norm. And over the years, it's led to so much emotional, sediment processing within you that you don't even know how to get rid of it. And my aunt Indira, the one who worked for the BBC, so her mother, who was again a Jubbal girl who married into Kapurthla, she had read the Rig Veda and she was a lot into her chanting and Vedic chants and very Indianized in that sense. And these people really believed in the power of alphabets, words, chants, and how they have a certain vibration. And how the importance of puja is not just ritualism, but how you are inculcating and bringing home a certain vibration into your home. And these things were passed on to us at a younger age, because I was like, why do people keep ringing bells and praying? Like, what is the reason for going to a temple? Can somebody explain to me the logic beside it being a ritual? Where does it go into affecting us as human beings? So this is where later on I went to study Nad yoga, sound healing, and what is the relevance of sound in healing.
Um, Unfortunately, I've just got a message saying we're going to run out of time, so I'm going to go to Mriganka and come back to you because I hear what you're saying. Mriganka, you seem to find healing through something that the world is just figuring out now, honey. Bee pollen is cool, everything to do
Yes.
with bees is fabulous. What brought you to this absolute nectar and this inner healing? We also know in Ayurveda that honey heals you, right? I mean, it's so what brought
Yeah.
you into fields of wellness? Here's emotional wellness, Divya is telling us. You feed us our wellness.
So, good evening, Nanita, and thank you, Anshu, for such a sweet introduction. Nanita, just to give you a brief as to what Pratapgarh Collective actually does, is we do 100% raw flower honey. Now, our raw flower honey comes from a monoflower. So, we do tulsi, we do jamun, we do lychee, we do mustard, we do uh, neem. So, all Ayurveda has been such a huge part of our old practices and traditions. So basically, honey making uh, is dated as one of the oldest occupations, but it was only restricted to the indigenous tribes. So today, I feel because you see shift, I mean, huge shift in people shifting towards the holistic lifestyle, and just eating well in general. So basically, I've always been away from home. I was in a boarding school. I was in Ajmer. Uh, I shifted to Delhi for my college and my work. And in 2011 is when, Nonita, I made the shift back to Pratapgarh. Now, Pratapgarh is my ancestral place. So I was looking to attach myself to cottage industry, which had less carbon footprint, which was sustainable, low in consumption of power. So I had the opportunity to meet Dr. Nitin. He's a scientist, he's a researcher in beekeeping, and has studied and worked in countries like Israel and Germany. So, with his knowledge and wisdom, I knew, and with the kind of technology and the new machineries that are available, this is something I would definitely want to tap into. Uh, in 2017 is when Pratapgarh Collective was conceived, and we started this whole process of honey making. To be very honest with you, Anita, it wasn't very easy because a lot of people discouraged me because there are already such giants like Dabur and Patanjali who are already existing in the market, and so many local homegrown brands coming up as well. But this is something I really wanted to do because I have a lovely team. We're all so connected. Also, I feel this whole farm to table philosophy is something which resonates with me. It's something our old traditions, our old practices, even something like a honey making, which was just so, I mean, which was only found in rural areas. Now you can actually give it a twist of luxury. So yeah, I mean, this is how
Well,
we started.
as a keeper of heritage, if you are
Yeah,
not going to be vocal for local, then who
right.
is? Right? And was that a driving force? I mean, I know it's hard, but were there any perks coming from the region and being of the people?
Absolutely, Nonita. I mean, I've always said this. I mean, even when we started the process, people, we do a few awareness campaigns, Okay, so one day I was sitting at the farm with my scientist, and it was just a thought, Nonita. Something as simple as, if we don't conserve the nature, the bees will die. And if the bees are non existent, the nature will slowly perish. So, this is something so simple yet terrifying. But the whole idea is to make the farmers aware. Also, like you said, it is of a privilege that people do take you seriously. When you say something, I think there's more weightage given to it because you come from a certain background, and that's how it works, unfortunately. But yeah, I feel that definitely heritage and background definitely has a role to play. But you have to use it to your advantage, Nonita, to actually create that kind of awareness. Because I feel we all are custodians of heritage in our own way. I mean, I think in the 21st century, a, a, a 21st century India is one that is, practicing old traditions and is in sync with the fourth industrial revolution. So, I mean, these two things can't be separated. They have to be in sync with each other. And I think that's the way forward.
Divya and Mriganka, I do owe you an apology. I didn't realize we had a time limit. I've been luxuriously having conversations, and I'm told we're logging off now. I do hope we can continue this conversation another time because I feel I've just got to know you, and there's so much more I want to know. And I appreciate your patchy connections and the effort you've made. Please accept my apologies. It is my fault, and I'm feeling terrible. But Anshu, you will allow us, I hope, to have another conversation because we haven't done justice to this. And thank you, Anshu. Thank you.
Of course.
Thank
Thanks.
you.
And
Thank you.
Thank you. But can I get everybody on the screen for a last parting thank you? And before we all go away, I'd like to thank Nyogi Books. Trisha was very kind to bring us on this form and do a great job of, coordinating all the screens. And they are like, I think they are one of the few publishers who have so many interesting books to their credit, including the two best books on Jaipur Court by Rahul Jain and Vandana Bhandari, and a lot of books on arms and armaments. So thank you, Trisha, for doing this, and thanks a lot, girls. Nonita, you were amazing, and really thanks a lot for finding the time. And Divya, everyone, thanks a lot. Thank you.
Thank
I
you.
just
Thank you.
have one thing to say. It was a pleasure meeting all you ladies. And please, all of you, drop in a line on my Facebook or something because I haven't come to Delhi in the longest time and I don't think I will. I'm going to be hibernating in the mountains the whole year. So it would be wonderful to be in touch with all of you because this is the first time, other than Urvashi, I've really interacted with any of you and you're all lovely. And Nonita, you are a wonderful host and don't apologize. I mean, it is what it is. What can we do? And hopefully you'll all be in touch.
We
We'll
have
do a
nothing but
special one. We'll do a special one with you. Thank you. Thanks a lot, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye bye.
soon.
See you all.
Bye.
Have a lovely, lovely evening.